loving and caring about the people who are in your community and in your neighborhood is a revolutionary act. And it is the counter strategy to isolationism, fear, and threat.
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, everyone, to episode 9 of the I'm Not Even Supposed to Be Here Today show, a controversial, culture savvy podcast for folks trying to make sense of a world. I mean, I don't know if he's gone sideways and then sideways the other way. And since the last time we recorded, I mean, we're at war now. I can't even keep up. Which is why we're here, because we're going to unpack the issues that boggle our minds, including that and a whole bunch of other stuff, all rooted in history, a little culture, a little humor, a little group therapy, a little humility. I am your co-host, Chris Bevelo, owner of Bearing 287, an organization fighting the good fight to make the world a better place for all, and the sponsor of the show. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Des, who is a social impact comm strategist by day and spends her nights remixing history to make sense of the present. Hi, Des.
What timeline are we on? What's happening? It feels like every day there's like a new just my God. Uh but hi, I'm here.
You're sure? We'll get into timelines later. I wish there was like a way you could just like see all the timelines and go, yeah, no, I don't like this one. I'm going back. Maybe our guest has that solution and we don't know it, because we are super excited to have our first guest on the pod, Diana Rhodes. Diana is based in Washington, D.C. and is a nonprofit leader, longtime organizer, reproductive justice and harm reduction advocate, and mutual aid supporter. She leads a national organization that works on reproductive and sexual health and rights advocacy and education, and is the board chair of a DC-based harm reduction organization. She is here to help us figure out which timeline we want to be in and give her perspective on what it means to show up when the world has gone just jackass sideways, leveraging her long experience as an organizer and advocate. Diana, welcome.
Hi, I'm really glad to be here and only slightly nervous to be your first guest. So thank you for that honor/pressure.
Nothing to be nervous about, no pressure at all. And we're going to give you a chance to kind of talk a little bit more about yourself in a second. We've got a lot in front of us, so I don't want to get into it yet, but I am interested in how you and Des came to know each other, because that's how you come to the show. And also, Des has let me know that you're a huge fan of Andor, and I know we're going to talk about Andor later because it actually is apropos of the world gone sideways that we face now. But tell us a little bit about how you two met and a little about who you are.
Yeah. So again, I'm Diana. I live in Washington, D.C. So for those who are watching, you can see my shirt right there. But I'm originally from Las Vegas. As you said in your intro, I lead a national organization on reproductive justice. I also do work in harm reduction. I've also spent the last couple decades organizing and facilitating arts and music spaces. So really, my passions have always been around facilitating and creating intentional spaces for social justice, but also for creativity and self-expression. So I've been organizing in different forms for a very long time, long enough to see a few cycles of backlash, which I think we're going to get into. But more importantly, how do I know Des? Des and I go way back, way back. We met in Vegas in our early 20s.
Incredibly
We
early
were we dating
20s.
back then? Incredibly, like those early 20s. Um, we were both doing feminist and queer activist and community building work, very scrappy DIY, figuring it out energy, as you do in your early 20s. And it's been many, many years since then. And it's been really beautiful to not just keep our friendship, but to stay in conversation about our relationships, our friendships, our projects, our careers, to watch each other grow while still caring about the same core things. And now getting to be on this podcast with y'all and chat more is just really exciting. So, yeah.
And actually one of the first events you did, was Ladyfest your first event ever?
It was my first big
First big.
festival. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and that was my first event that I attended when I moved to Las Vegas. a friend of mine was connected to the university, and I happened to tag along with her, and that's where we first met, but we became friends a little bit later in the actual activist space. So yeah, been following Diana and going to all of her events for like almost 20 years.
Well, I feel like I need.
Yeah, I wasn't gonna
I feel,
touch the number, but yeah, it's been, 20 years.
you did a good job. Des blew that up. I have to clarify something though. You said you shared core values, and I know you're a fan of Andor, and Des is off speculative fiction, which I every time I hear that, I feel like that's a redundant phrase. But how is it possible that you two are friends and one adores Andor, which is of course the right point of view, and the other one doesn't, which is of course the um, incorrect point of view?
Yeah, this is a very important subject to bring up. And, we'll probably have to discuss this further, Des, and really kind of hammer out our core values. But yes, almost everything except I love me some fantasy and sci-fi, and it's just not Des's thing. But I also like animated worlds. I just really appreciate world building as a literary and creative medium. I don't see it as escapism. I see it as an opportunity to like grow and stretch and imagine different worlds. But I think for the topic of this conversation, I often think about when someone builds an entirely new universe with its own rules, its own power structures, moral codes, histories, you're really forced to ask different questions about like what makes something just, who gets to belong, what what is power protecting, what is it afraid of, and I don't know. I just think that sometimes entrenching ourselves in fantasy or futuristic worlds actually helps you see your own world more clearly. Like when you strip away the familiar, like the flags and the parties, the institutions, you're just looking at an empire or a rebellion or like a collapsing planet, and all of those dynamics just become more obvious. We see like the nuances of good and evil, and we see how ordinary people get pulled into harmful systems. We see how collectivism works and how survival depends on cooperation and working together and being with each other. And we see how difference is treated, whether it's feared or valued. Um, I just I just honestly think that world building can be deeply political, even if it's just also entertaining. It's asking if we can design a world from scratch, what would we keep, what would we change? It's not really escapism. It's kind of like rehearsal for a world we want to build or a world we want to avoid. But I don't know. I feel like it just helps us imagine something different while seeing and having a microscope on our own lives and societies much more clearly. Plus, it's entertaining as hell and super fun.
There you go. There you go. Des, what's your response to all
So,
that?
Des, what do you think?
Okay, like when you wax poetic about it, like I feel like just a total like weirdo, not like giving into that. But I think you hit something about like avoiding and like for me, I think it's like suspending like belief when I don't know, I guess when I live in a world where it feels like I just constantly can't believe like what we're doing or experiencing, like, I don't know that I want to, like, add into that, but I could see where it could actually relieve some of that and give you more. I'm slowly getting into, more of it in my later years, so yeah. I mean, I've seen you guys, like, get into your comic books and, like, nerd out on Doctor Who and, like, other like, you had, like, a whole Doctor Who party that I don't even think I went because I was like, "What are you talking about?" But alright, I'll fine. I'll give it more of a shot. I think for me, it's more about the story and, like, I think some early sci-fi, the way they talked about things, the mainframe that I'm out. It just loses me, but to y'all's point, it has gotten better.
The mainframe? Who hurt you, Des? Who hurt you?
Those script writers did.
Well, we can get into this more later on. but I love how you set all that up, Diana. And what I will tell you, Des, is you have to watch Andor. I'm saying this for the 18th time. And the trick is you're going to have to deal with some just typical Star Wars, though probably the best done Star Wars, to be honest, to get to the part that is really, really telling a narrative about the world we're in right now, to be fair. So give it some time to get to that. Don't give up just because of a couple of like the bank heist segment where there's a whole series of episodes that are just like a bank heist. It's still amazing, but trust us on that. Okay, let's get into this because Diana, you're here for a reason, not just because you're cool and you have all this great experience, but we have talked about different ways to get involved, right? So I started my company, This Monsters This, just in October because I wanted to fight the good fight. And Des and I always talk about, well, what does that even mean? You know, having a podcast, that's not really, I'm just yapping. I write a lot. I'm just writing. What can we do? So we had an episode about running for office as an example. And so we wanted to talk about organizing and protests and know that you have experience with that. And, you know, it just is so frustrating to me. I'm going to go on my little diatribe here to set things up, and then I'm going to really let you guys talk because you are the one. Well, you guys started in your very early 20s with this. I was working at a store called Drug Town. That's a real name of a store. Every time I tell people that, they think I'm making it up. So that's where I was in my early 20s. So we need to listen to you two, but I can certainly vent the frustration that I think many of us feel, right? Because when we started this podcast, and the name, I'm not even supposed to be here today, an allusion to Clerks, which is like, God, I'm not even supposed to be dealing with this right now. And the list of things that we continually face is insane. It's really insane. I don't know if it's unprecedented. I think the late 60s had a lot going on, but this is pretty close. And we did not sign up for this. We're just minding our own business, trying to live our lives. And now we have state sanctioned chaos. We have the federal government posting misinformation and Nazi messaging on a daily basis. We have people living in parallel realities in terms of their exposure to the federal government and budget cuts or ICE. We have the president threatening to take over our elections. I'm in Minneapolis, as many of you know. We continue to be assaulted by federal agents to this day. They're supposed to leave, winding down. No, that's not really taken place. Maybe it has to a degree, but they're not gone. And last week, was it just last week? We heard from the brain trust of J.D. Vance and Dr. Oz that because we've been so bad in Minnesota with our fraud, that they're going to cut or halt millions in Medicaid funding, I guess to teach us a lesson. Like, I'm sorry. There are choice words I'd like to say right now to them. I'll hold them for later. And by the way, we attacked Iran this weekend if you were living on a rock. So we got that going for us, which is nice. So coming from Minnesota and Minneapolis, we've had a lot of protests here, right? We had a big one. I think it was on the 25th or 6th, the day before Alex Preddy was murdered. We had tens of thousands of people. There were protests the week after that. And we have protests every single day in Minneapolis at the Whipple Federal Building where people are held. And so lots of protesting. And yet here we are facing a lot of feedback on whether protests are worthwhile. And I'm going to pick on my Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, Scott Galloway, who I swear every time I hear him, he says something that makes me want to just run screaming to the woods. And then other times, like his boycott that he's putting on now is actually well-intentioned and effective. But he was at his worst in an interview with Timothy Snyder, who wrote a book called On Tyranny, which is fantastic, by the way. And Scott was just kind of smug and privileged, which he often is, and he's talking straight out of his ass. And he asked him, like, so is protesting just the newest form of door knocking. It's, not effective at all. Thankfully, and not surprisingly, Snyder kind of pushed back and said, no, not at all. Actually, it has a lot of value. And to his credit, this is why I can't just throw Scott Galloway in the dumpster and shut the door and lock it and go away forever. He acknowledged, like, oh, I think I had it wrong. And I've learned, which he does from time to time. So I don't know. He's just like a project you have to just watch real time evolve into a full human being sometimes, I think. So we've got that. But I think, we have the No Kings March coming up. And my wife and I were having this conversation. And I'm like, I need to do more. I want to go to that. And she's like, I don't think I'm going to go. Now, this is my wife flew to DC following Trump's first inauguration for the, oh gosh, what was it called? The Women's March. It had a different name, and I'm going to butcher it. So I'm not going to try. She flew to DC for that. She is a trauma therapist who works with people that have suffered incredible trauma from mass shootings, for example. She works with plenty of people that have been affected by ICE, have been affected by Medicaid cuts. And she's like, I'm just kind of worn out from the protest thing. I'm doing enough otherwise, which she clearly is, right? So there is no right answer to this, I guess is my point. But this is where I would love to turn it over to you two to just kind of like get into this a little bit. I don't know if either of you want to weigh in before, Des, you start kind of going backwards in time to how we get here. But this is a nuanced conversation about protests, and hearing from somebody who is a professional organizer, I think will be super helpful. So that's my contribution to this podcast. And then I will play along as we go and ask the questions of as if I were the audience, because I really don't have any experience with this whatsoever.
Well, and I'm pretty sure Diana has perspective given that like all the major protests had come directly to her city like almost every day. Um, but yeah, it's interesting position.
Yeah, I can jump in and thanks for setting that up. I think it helps create a little bit of context. I mean, I have a few thoughts. So one, like I don't think it's dramatic to say that we're in an authoritarian moment. I think it's pretty accurate, right? And I think what makes it dangerous isn't just the loud chaos, which I think we feel, right? We are feeling it in our bodies, this chaos, the current news cycle, but it's also the normalization. We're like living in this like slow normalization phase of authoritarianism. Um, it doesn't arrive. Authoritarianism doesn't just arrive. Let's go back to sci-fi in a spaceship, but it arrives in small administrative decisions. One of those decisions is around Medicaid that you just mentioned earlier, or others, right? And I'm going to keep going back to Andor, but it brings me back to thinking about Andor. So, Chris, you can get this one. But something was said in that show from the Empire side, and it's been a while since I've seen it. But they said, now we just have to wait for the right person to do the wrong thing, and that's the moment we're in right now in this country. We know that this administration wants to have ultimate power. And one way we're seeing it is through the administration declaring, quote, national emergencies, state emergencies, right? And I'm going to reference what happened here in DC. And then we saw a trickle effect across the country and in your home state of Minnesota, Chris. But one of those moments in real time was um, a Doge staffer got jumped by teenagers in DC one weekend, right? Um, if folks don't remember, his nickname was Big Balls. So a 19-year-old employee, a Doge staffer, gets jumped by a few teenagers in DC. And because he was a Doge staffer, it got to the president's ear. And it was the perfect opportunity for Trump to declare DC dangerous and declare an emergency, which gave him the power to call in the National Guard and almost every other federal federal troops into the city. And they're still here. We have, just as you said, Chris, like in Minnesota, we still have the National Guard patrolling our streets. And for a while, we had the FBI, the Secret Service, other federal agents patrolling our streets, right? And that was a test. And what exactly, bringing it back to Andor, they were just waiting for the right person to do the wrong thing, right? So they can make their move. And when I was watching the second season of Andor, I was like, oh my God, it's happening right now in real time. I just saw the president do that, right? And that's what we're seeing. They're declaring emergencies so they can use a different part of the law, right? Because they can't do certain things legally. But if they declare national emergencies, it gives them more power. And that's what this government's about. So that's one thing that comes to mind. But as far as protest and even the effectiveness goes, I just also want to like take us back to protest or direct action, like the Women's March, like the No Kings rally. It's not a strategy, it's a tactic, right? A strategy, it's one tactic in a bigger strategy. And so I think, for a lot of us, it's easy for us to sit and be like, is this protest effective? Is it actually working? I don't see a change. But we're not the ones on the ground doing the organizing that is building out a strategy in which we are building momentum to a certain goal. And that's what organizing is. That's the bigger picture and the on the ground work. And a protest is one piece in that entire puzzle. And what it does is it builds momentum, and momentum is the metric. It's not the goal, right? And so I think, I always find it's important to kind of step back from that because I don't know, we're in the era of like hot takes. Everyone likes to have a hot take, and immediately, like, I went there and the thing hasn't changed. The policy's not changed. So therefore it didn't work. And what's the point of it all? And I don't know. That's not the point, right? And so I think, just kind of keeping that in mind that it is a tactic, not a strategy, protest or rallies. And honestly, uh, so two more things. Honestly, sometimes just like being around other people who care about the same thing you do, that's what solidarity is. And that you feel it in your body. There's a reason why people gather, and there's a reason why rallies and protests speak to people, especially people who aren't engaged every day, because they feel isolated. And protests and rallies and these gatherings give us an opportunity to not feel isolated. Authoritarianism and fascism feeds off of our isolation and fear. And the more we can come together, that builds momentum, right? And so, yeah, I'll pause there, but those are some initial thoughts. I don't know, Des, you have anything to add there?
No, I love that you bring that up of kind of like the twofold, like things that those kinds of organizing provide. So it's like it's a tactic and that we don't need to know, all of the inner workings. And perhaps maybe because we're so used to being, because of like cable news, like the 24-hour news cycle. I'm like, why don't we know this? It's like, well, if we knew this, then the other people would know what we're doing, what we're trying to plan here. And that it's not up to us. And I think for me, like I always kind of think when there's something going on, if I haven't heard any kind of like red flag from Diana, then I feel like somebody's working on it because I feel like she has a pulse of like at least like, oh yeah. Or sometimes I'll ask you, I'm like, is there like are there people meeting in a room about this? And that other piece about like bringing folks together, and as much as because I kind of struggle with, do I want to go to this protest? And I think you and I talked about this before, Diana, about like, hey, had this been like maybe 10 years ago, then yeah, like all, ablazed about it. But now, kind of in this different, part of our lives, part of understanding the system, that there isn't that call. Or perhaps if you've been in this kind of space and maybe you already kind of have folks that you're connected to, that there isn't as much isolation around this. But I could see where all of our algorithms, everything that we see is like super tailored to us. And in a way, it does, even though like we're supposed to be more connected to one another. In a way, we do feel a bit more disconnected because this digital connection isn't even real. And so much of it is we're not even really seeing each other's experiences, thoughts, or photos because it's just a bunch of, to Chris's 2 cent nation a bunch of people who declare themselves as strategists that are giving their hot take on what's going on. So we don't even really kind of get that experience of, the personal and the interpersonal. But that's definitely what I've been kind of wrestling with, just my own personal feeling like friends that are just out there in the streets, anytime I talk to them, they're like, "Oh, did you protest? Did you go to this? Da, 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 da." And then I have to like sit with my answer of, no, I didn't. And that's okay. But sometimes it doesn't feel like it's
Yeah, and
okay.
movements are ecosystems, and not everyone is meant to be loud. There's a really great map. I think it's called the Social Change Ecosystem Map or
Mm.
some version of those words. Um, but it has this map of like the various different roles. Um, there are healers, there are caretakers, there are disruptors, there are facilitators, there are direct first responders, there are, you know, communicators, there are storytellers, there are artists, right? We all have a different role to play in creating social change. You don't have to be everything and you don't have to be the loud one. You just try to be something that you feel comfortable being, right? And I think that's really important. And I work in an organization that trains young people to be activists. We work with youth activists who are just kind of getting involved. And something I always say is like, we sometimes focus on the person giving the speech or on the megaphone. But there are so many other roles to be played. And I did a workshop years ago on like the power of quiet. And it was like an activism workshop for introverts, right? And just recognizing that we all have a role to play, right? And it doesn't all have to be the same thing. We just also live in a society that favors extroverts, that favors and uplifts the loud, and also favors and uplifts a central figurehead. Movements are decentralized. Movements have multiple people working together, but we as a society always want to focus on the one and be able to have that kind of loud, focused leader or whatever it is. And so I think giving ourselves some grace in this moment, we're allowed to be angry and exhausted and still go to dinner with our friends, right?
Mhm.
Just staying human and connected is part of the resistance. It is resistance. And I think we need to give ourselves permission to connect and get involved in different ways and whatever makes us feel comfortable. Unfortunately, you know, social media can feel at a saturation point and hot takes can feel like a saturation point and it can make you feel like you're not doing enough when you probably are.
Doing
Yeah.
something that really makes sense for you. But Chris, what are your thoughts before we head into like how we got here?
Well, I think the idea that it puts you in a place where you have other people and you have that support. Timothy Snyder, two of his responses really resonated with me. One of them was that, just like it makes you feel better. You're around people that have like views and that can uplift you. And then also the idea that when you go to a protest, you're likely to be exposed to more of what we're talking about, the organization behind it, the different roles that there are that you may not even realize exist. So you may think, oh, I'm just there to walk, but you may be more attracted to be somebody who's going to deliver food or somebody who's going to stake out a corner or somebody who's going to help with the communications, whatever. You see and become more active just by going, or it's more likely. And I feel that personally because I'm old. And as you get older, as you two will realize as you get older, the idea of going to a R&B party at First Avenue on a Saturday afternoon sounds really good when you buy the ticket. And then when that Saturday comes around, you're like, "Oh my gosh, am I gonna go downtown and really that just sounds so far away. I'm on the suburb, blah, blah, blah." You think all the stuff is good, and then you're like, "Oh, it's too much." But when you go, I always feel like, "Thank God I went." because that was amazing and that was fun and that's living life. I need to do more of that until I get back to my, suburb and then I'm all tired again. But this is the same thing. You go out there and you actually live it and experience it. And you're not going to be able to replicate that just by watching on social media or watching on the news. So that's what I take from a lot of what you guys are saying and some of the stuff I've read.
And so that piece about living your life, that's essentially, what all of this is about. Is that, we'll get into this a little bit later about the isolation piece. But Diana, when you and I were kind of talking about this, you brought up the idea that, you know, w- when you just see the headlines of like what's being taken away or what white rights have been stripped or, what doesn't get funded, rest assured that like, A, this stuff still does have to continue, and it does. And that we always find a way. And I know you have like some really great context around like how that really shows up from a kind of a social services standpoint. So would love to kind of just hear your thinking around like just we continue. The work continues always, regardless of what chaos is out there that we're navigating on our way to get to the work.
Yeah, definitely. I think we were doing this before it was acceptable. We were doing this work before it was mainstream. We were doing this work before it was funded, before it was institutionalized, right? Um, it be doing this work and building a career on advocacy in reproductive justice and LGBTQ health and rights and other public health issues. It pains me that I've seen so many steps back in the way that I've been able to be a part of so many steps forward. But we also know that this is cyclical too, right? And what grounds me is just, you know, it's so chaotic and it can feel so disheartening. But we also know that so many of the rights that we may be losing or had so many of the issues that we care about, this work has been going on for a long time. And so I think about this in like reproductive rights, LGBTQ, harm reduction. Like there were abortion funds arranging rides and covering procedures quietly for years, navigating hostile laws, clinic closures, stigma, long before like Roe v. Wade fell. Even before it was overturned, access wasn't even real in huge parts of the country. And you know, abortion funds existed. People were doing practical support and making sure they got the services they need before all of this was happening, and we will continue to do so, right? There were queer organizers building community centers, connecting with each other, creating healthcare networks during the AIDS crisis, the HIV crisis, when the federal government refused to act, and now they are refusing to act again. But um, folks were doing that work, right? There were harm reduction workers distributing supplies out of backpacks in vans, running underground syringe exchanges, training each other on how to reverse overdoses. Back before funders and public health institutions wouldn't even touch the work, right? They wouldn't even say the words harm reduction. They wouldn't even name trans communities or gender affirming care, right? And so I guess the through line is that the work was always happening. We have always existed. We have always taken care of each other. Um, and so and we were doing this before it was acceptable in the mainstream. And we are just going to have to keep doing it until it becomes, until we are in a different moment, right? I guess, I've had these moments of flailing, as we all do, especially we've been doing this work for a while, and you're kind of confronted with the changes that are happening. But I think, with age, and kind of with longevity, you kind of develop a different muscle, and you learn how to adapt. You learn how to survive when there's lack of funding or there's lack of political will, and you panic. But then I think a lot of seasoned organizers or folks who've been around for a while take a breath, and we just take a breath and recognize that, you know, we've we've done this before. We've lived in this. It's been different, but you know, we've we've had underground networks before. We've connected and make sure people have gotten services and care before. Um, and, we just have to continue to do so. There's this kind of quiet persistence and adaptability, I think we panic at first and then we put our heads down and do the work and take care of our communities and we take care of us. And at the end of the day, the approval from government institutions and institutions writ large doesn't, uh, it doesn't make it um, doesn't make us real. It doesn't, we don't need the approval of
Mhm.
these institutions and government because we take care of us.
Yeah, it's that when you're already in community with people, like you're able to keep up and just keep doing the thing. So often, especially these last, couple of years, what kind of gave me solace and in a way, like it feels a little bit frivolous, but also like it's also what gives us our energy. I think about friends of ours that were deep in, the AIDS organizing and making sure that their fellow, brothers were getting meds or getting something, getting taken care of, getting rides to the doctor, right? And to cope with that amount of the trauma of watching people essentially disappear or die right in front of you, how do you let off that steam? And like they would go to epic parties, to then give them energy to wake up the next morning and do this thing and see these things that like they should have never have had to have seen, close up like that. And so I was thinking about the a couple years ago when like, this kind of reminds me of like, okay, to your point about like we go back underground, these movements continue just because, out there in the public it's acting as if like, oh, like we've taken this down. It's like, no, like the movement, the party continues. And so I always reflect on like my love of house music and like kind of how we got there. And it started with anytime, and I've noticed that there's always like that pendulum is always right there. So you can't even say like, oh, how did we get here? Honey, we're always on the cycle. We're going to be on this cycle. Like, newsflash, this is going to be our lives. Like, ideally, you do this work thinking, hoping that you'll get to that place of like, oh, like finally we'll be. You don't. You don't. In fact, I think one of my partner's favorite shows, Hades Town, is about that very thing where like we keep fighting because like that's what it takes. And so you see the rise of like black and brown joy and queer joy with the rise of disco music. And it takes over the airwaves. And those folks that don't see themselves in that, you get angry. Like, where's our rock and roll? Where's that? Da, 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 da. And so then you get the essentially the disco sucks, rally, the backlash to all of these things, just like we're seeing the backlash to all of this DEI and quote unquote woke stuff. Like, oh, we got to tear it all down. But rest assured that, okay, yeah, you don't want to see it's like, okay, but we're going to keep this going and it's just going to, go underground. It's going to become house parties. We're going to continue to, transition this music that then becomes, from disco, it goes, house music and techno. And then to all of a sudden, when you look and you wake up today and you see one of the biggest and largest, fastest growing music genres, and it's EDM. And like in a way, like you kind of feel like, oh, this isn't the raves of my day out in the woods, out in the desert. But it just, to me, that kind of warms my heart to know that we shall get through this and that who knows what beauty and what incredible a sense of self and life that can come out from like really shining and sharpening this like whatever this is that some pearl can this pieces of sand that this pearl will rise down the line. We may not be alive to see it, but rest assured that this will continue. So that's what always kind of gives me a sense of like, no, if and again, it feels frivolous to say this, based off of like what Harriet Tubman and folks did with the actual Underground Railroad. But it still just shows the power of community and like being there for each other, and then also like just living in joy and experiencing that. But I'm kind of curious, both of you, your thoughts on this idea of, still kind of leaning into your art, where you can fit in mutually, just being in community, and that as that as a example of resistance. Whoever has anything.
I mean, the thing that resonates with me and all that, Des, is a conversation you and I had. I don't know when it was, last year, the year before. It, it was when the backlash against DEI, the dismantling of the DEI, was really hitting clients that we worked with. Both of us worked with at the time, health systems, where they were being told they had, they're going to lose funding if they did strip, all these words, including women. Like, just the words are like this. I think the list is like 700 words long, right? And I was just incensed and angry, and at the of course at the effort to dismantle all of it, but also at the capitulation. So I was really like, why are these people standing up, and they should stand up, and blah blah blah. And Des, I remember you saying like, hey, this is when sometimes people need to go underground with some of this stuff. And I was very adamant about, like, well, if you agree to take away DEI as a label, you are giving them what they're asking for, which is that DEI is a bad thing. And I don't know, it came to a conversation where I took away, and Des was very sophisticated and kind of hitting me across the head with this, which was like, it's easy for some of us to stand up, right? And say, like, well, that's just wrong, because we're not going to get punished for that. But it's not easy for a lot of people. And I guess so that was really helpful to me. Where I struggle now with some of this, Des, and this isn't cultural necessarily, is yes, the efforts for DEI, we'll use as an example, will continue underground. We'll change the name, we'll change the wording, but we're still going to keep the effort going. What I get so frustrated at are the people like me that should stand up. And I'm not saying that's me. I'm talking Gavin Newsom. So, for example, somebody who's in a position of privilege to be able to fight without repercussions, maybe as governor of California to be a little, but instead goes, it's just like, we need to be more normal culturally. That was why we lost the last election, right? You're like, that's what frustrates me. Like, I understand why the Trump administration is doing this, because they're a bunch of assholes, right? And I understand why some institutions, some of which I have a lot of respect for example, are closing their gender affirming care for minors. And I have a 27-year-old transgender daughter, right? Because they're threatened with losing billions of dollars, right? Like, what are you going to do? That's a very difficult situation. What I don't understand are the folks that could stand up and say something and don't. And that's, in both those cases and others, that's what drives me bonkers. It gets me angry. And so I don't know how to grapple with that. I don't know what grace to give Gavin Newsom or Pete Buttigieg when you
Specifically.
said that. Or go watch the senator from New Jersey, what's his, Cory Booker, or who was the other person who did this? Gavin Newsom did it too. Ask him about Gaza. Hakeem Jeffries, and watch them spend 5 minutes gurgling bullshit without saying a damn thing. Like, those are the people that could actually say something, and they're not. And so that's the part I don't get. And I don't know how that's related to protests or organizing, but that's what I got from what you just said, Des. Like, what about those people? What the hell?
We can't be worried about those people, and also there's no incentive for them to do so, but I imagine, Diana, you're ready to go on something like this.
Um, the people you mentioned, Chris, I was thinking, and especially as you named, you know, they're elected officials who, okay, I think whether it's an individual or a person, an organization, institution, right now and always, but especially right now, you're kind of mapping out your risk management, your risk mitigation. You're kind of weighing the various different risks and what's important, right? Um, and they're telling us what they care most about, which is getting elected and being centrist, right? Like, and pandering to a certain population of people or institutions or companies that will help them continue to stay in office or reach higher offices, right? I think they're telling us their values. I don't in these statements, they're telling us what they care about and what they don't care about and who they care about. As far as, other, whether it's nonprofit organizations or advocacy groups, I know in the positionality I have done so many risk assessment, risk management, risk mitigation, like meetings and mapping out and, all of these different things where you have to make some difficult decisions on, we talked in the start around the kind of DEI funding and the executive orders and what is more important? Is it more important for us to use this language, or is it more important for the most marginalized people in our communities to get these services, right? And you have to weigh that. Or, you also look at your positionality within kind of social movements, right? I think there are some organizations that are able to be more vocal on certain issues and some that just aren't, right? And that's what, like, I think social movements are based off of is us understanding where we all stand and where we can push and pull. There are some organizations that are able to be much more vocal and be much more radical in their language, and some others can't, but those organizations are able to get into the doors that the radical groups aren't. And they're all communicating with each other. And that is what a strategy is,
Yeah.
right? Like that is like, what I think we should be doing. We don't all have to be saying the same thing, but we're working towards the same goal. And we have different positionalities in it, depending on our risk factors. As someone who leads a national organization with, um, I'm constantly battling of like, okay, uh, at the end of the day, I want to protect my staff. But I want our staff to be able to do the work that they want to do. And we have to be able to do that within our values. And so that is what any individual, so these politicians that you mentioned, and should go back to, and organizations and social movements, what are our values? And then making every single decision based off of that. And I think especially for the politicians, who we're disappointed by, they're telling us their values. That's why we get angry.
And then that's where
That's
we
fair.
make different decisions to, okay, we're going to get someone else to run that is actually, more aligned with our values and put our backing behind them when we're super organized. But I get it. Like people do show us what their values are. And then also like, what they're willing to fight against. Because like if it's not something that you have to, then why would you put your neck out? But I think that's really interesting where, with what you're doing, Chris, and then what Scott Galloway is doing, where maybe that's the role that you all can play is like, talk to your brothers about doing better or finding other ways because for other communities that are minoritized or have a marginalized existence, we see it and then we say, oh, okay, I know exactly who you are, and then we're not gonna like it's not gonna help us to go to fight with that person publicly in that way. It's more of like I see what this is at face value, and then I can make decisions based off of that and able to continue doing that thing. Then I'll keep in mind with, okay, what do you value? How can I tie this thing that I need to that value in order to get it done? Because no, at the end of the day, we always still have to play to someone else's ego or opinion of themselves or their work in order to get the thing done. I mean, just like with you think about fundraising and development director, if the work of your organization is not in line with that funder that you're hoping to get money for, then like good luck. Why would they give to something that is obviously not outlined on their sustainability site of what they're focused on and their values? Um, But I often think about this notion of part of me, because it kind of is cultural in a way. I'm wondering this piece of this is something I ran across that was talking about that sense of identity, and especially as an American and as a white American, what is that identity that kind of roots you? And like whiteness is not an identity per se in in this country. It is an identifier, a category, but it isn't actually an identity. And how much of our sense of staying, in the realm of like just kind of accepting things as they are in front of us, but then continue to do that work internally has to do with being rooted in, as a part of a community. The same way the simple things of like, when I walk into a room and I kind of spot either, the black folks or the queer folks, just to kind of some like, hey, I see you, hi, we're in community. Like even though I've never met that person before in my entire life, right? Or I know Diana with you, when you meet another, Vietnamese person, you're like, hey, you know, but how much of that is like there's this sense of pride of like the history and the heritage of that we're able to channel that America has essentially asked white folks to give up, So like I know Chris, you're Italian, right? How much do you kind of connect with that given just because you're in the US versus like if your family were still in Italy? Or maybe you do still have family in the old country, right? How much of that are you able to draw from? I know this is like super like not more like it just hit me, right? Because it's something that I read earlier about just having that thing to connect with. My partner, she's half Irish, half Jewish. And, for her, we're always talking about kind of her Irish heritage and like just kind of pull like that being a life force in a way for her as it is for me as a black person. And I imagine Diana that shows up for you. Um, with other identities. I'm just curious, and both of you can answer, like, and you may not have an answer right away, Chris, but it just kinda sparked that thought.
I do, and I'll keep it brief because I'm gonna hear from Diana. Uh, I don't I mean, my Italian heritage is no connection at all. Now, my dad maybe a little, my grandfather almost certainly, because he grew up in an Italian neighborhood in St. Louis. So almost certainly, Italians were marginalized in when they came in the early 1900s, right? All the way probably through the 50s until they became white, and then they were fine. Right? But they were a completely separate
Allegedly.
subculture, just like the Irish were. Um, and so I don't, none of that's gone. That's probably 2 generations gone. You know what my trite answer is, but it's probably correct, and then I'll let Diana talk. It's sports, which is really sad. The only thing other than maybe like, but this is still more sports related, a connection to the people I went to school with, like the university I went to, that's really tied to sports though. Otherwise, it's you're a Vikings fan or you're a Iowa State Cyclone fan or whatever. I'm trying to think of what else there is. For me, I don't know what that is, and I don't think for most white people there could be religion 100%. I'm not religious. So, I would assume that is probably the number one answer. It's just not for me.
Diane, I'm curious your thoughts, your take.
Yeah, I'm uh, a Vietnamese American. I was born in the United States, but my family came over to US after the fall of Saigon, and we've made my many most of my many of my family are now here in this country and making a life for ourselves. And it's deeply connected to kind of who I am and the communities I build, but also you said something earlier, Des, of kind of like coming across other Vietnamese people, you kind of might, you acknowledge, and there is a connection, and maybe like common interests or subcultures or whatever that isn't the connection, but the history of how we came to be here on this land in this country is often shared. And those dynamics of our family, very cultural dynamics of our family, of our food, of our customs, of our traditions, and of our challenges and our traumas, right, is shared. And I think uh, community is built on you know sometimes common experiences, and then also of shared interests and like-mindedness, right? And Chris, you mentioned about sports, right? And so I feel like there's often a couple different ways that we kind of connect with one another, and sometimes it's our identities, and sometimes it's the subcultures and interests we have, and those are often just as important because those are things that we choose, right? We choose these kind of underground, um, uh, you were mentioning house music and raves earlier, Des. Like, we choose to be a part of these spaces because we like it, right? We choose to be Vikings fans because we like the Vikings. And then there's community that's built in. Or, I don't know, I'm referencing the name of a thing
You're,
that you just mentioned.
yes, we are sentenced to be Vikings fans, whether we like it or not. I didn't mean to cut you
And
off.
that comes with the family trauma.
That's right.
Yeah, I was destined to be a Cubs fan too. So I there was destiny also in some of my like sports things too. But there's connection via interests and subcultures and cultures we belong to. And then there's connection via identity and our shared histories. And sometimes those look different and sometimes one are stronger than the other.
Yeah, I bring this up because this came from I saw a post is from the author and psychologist Dr. Dana E. Crawford. Her page is CBRT for everyone, and she just kind of mentioned and talked about this. And it got me thinking about like so movies like The Brutalist and Everything Everywhere All at Once. Those movies, those films, and other stories like that are so powerful because it's connected to the shared experience. Those particular movies are connected to the shared experience of, immigrant families in the US, um, that I feel like, if you aren't necessarily a brown person, a black person, that you had to essentially kind of shake that with the term white and black and what have you. And so I'm wondering about, if we're able to maybe, folks actually go back to that heritage and have that to lean on. Or Diana, to your point of like, okay, well, if I don't have that, or if it's been too many generations removed and it feels weird to even like try to claim this whole thing. And then like, girl, you haven't talked about that in 30 years. Like, why are you doing that now? You can still lean into, as your point about like the communities that you subscribe to now. So like I know Chris, you're a gamer. Like so pushing sports aside, 'cause you're not even really subscribing to Vikings, it sounds like. You like out of obligation. But almost in like maybe for every folks listening, it's like maybe your knitting group, your gaming crew, your youth people that you throw events with. Like maybe that is your place to kind of find yourself rooted in. That's outside of this ideology push that I feel like everything is like being subscribed to. But like finding more, because all of this essentially is about like us getting back to ourselves and each other. And so kind of getting at some of from our conversations before, Diana, you kind of brought this up about essentially authoritarianism is all about trying to isolate us, all about finding different ways to say like, oh, y'all are different. Or you need to kind of just like be to yourself or what have you. That so much of this is rooted in that, and that so much of like what makes these other makes minoritized communities so powerful in that way is because like they have a sense of self within that. Whether like as a queer person, I'm like I'm riding or dying for my people. As a black person, what have you. I'm just kind of curious around that. Like, how are you like really leaning into community to get through these moments?
And as you said it right, authoritarianism thrives on isolation, right? It's not accidental. It's a strategy. If you don't know your neighbors, if you don't know the people around you, you're easier to govern. And that's what they thrive off of. If we have fear from the people around us, if we are scared, if we have fear, we feel other people around us are threatening us, then we're all easier to govern. And that's what authoritarianism is thriving on. And so I think you're right. Like, community, I feel like isolation is the strategy, and then community is the counter strategy. And really, community is love, right? It's connecting with one each other and caring about one another. And connection can be boring, but it's actually revolutionary, right?
Oh,
This kind of caring for one another and building community. And I think we've been talking about kind of like rooting for our own community, having kind of interests and building community. But also, I'm talking about like collective care and community care. What does that mean, right? And that goes back to what we talked about earlier. And I mean, around mutual aid and practical support. And Chris, Minnesota has showed us what it means to do collective care, right? And that in and of itself is what is the antidote to the authoritarianism. I often, think about how isolated we can be, like you don't know your neighbors or you don't know what's going on down the street, and then when decisions are being made or fear or violence is being sowed, like you don't necessarily feel like you might have incentive to do anything, right? So I think we need to move from community as far as people we know and uh people we connect with because of shared interests or other types of communities to um community based off of also caring about strangers, people you don't know, right? Our neighbors. And so I truly believe that collective care, community care, and getting to know those around you at the most local level is what builds power. And we go back to like, what is organizing? What is protest? It's building momentum. It's building a base, but it's also shifting power. That is the core of social change, is power shifting, right? And if you get to know your like neighbors and then your block and then the few blocks around you, and then you're in a signal group or a WhatsApp channel, whatever it is, and are able to say, hey, there's some ICE agents on this corner and this corner, and people can go out. And it's not because you know who lives on that corner. You just know that's the corner of your community and your neighbors, right? And again, we saw this in Minnesota. We're seeing this across the country in Los Angeles and DC and various places where they have like employed troops to terrorize us. And they would thrive if we stop caring about each other, even if we don't know each other. You may not know all these people in your neighborhood, in your community, but it doesn't change the fact that they're kidnapping your neighbors and your community. And so I think the step further right now is building community, even if you don't know everyone in it, right? That loving and caring about the people who are in your community and in your neighborhood is a revolutionary act, and it is the counter strategy to isolationism, fear, and threat, right?
Because essentially the thing that they're afraid of is that when we all collectively get together, I'm thinking, of course, the late great Jesse Jackson, his Rainbow Coalition, that was originally started by Fred Hampton from the Black Panthers, of this idea of this multi-racial, multi-ethnic, multicultural, just like everybody kind of coming together, that there's so much that can actually happen. And like with neighbors, we're seeing that, happen in a way, uh, you know, with people getting more connected, not just because of an identity or what have you, but just the identity of human, of neighbor, of friend. That's what they're afraid of, and that's why they try to keep us. But the more that you resist that and like be in community with everyone, regardless, that the way that's a way for us to overcome this. But Chris, I know you had something to add as well.
No, I just all of that hits really home for me and what I'm trying to do with this next chapter of my life, because I've had visions of being part of a local, like being in a room and organizing around a cause or an election or something, and like being giddy about that. Just really wanting to, and part of it, this just goes back to culture, right? That we've all seen the movies where everybody's got their sleeves rolled up and they're really focused. And for a moment, because we know there's politics and bullshit and all that stuff that exists in that world too. But for a moment, they're all connected and actually making the change happen. And you meet new people, and these are people that are smart and they're passionate. And holy crap, that's just like a whole new world that's just sitting there for someone like me, which is a phenomenal part of what I'm going to be doing moving forward. And I can't wait to get involved in some of those. I'm trying to be selective because I only have so much time. So right now I'm kind of just like perusing what's the best place to jump in. Is it a political race? It's certainly what's going on with ICE, and I just haven't figured out how to do that. My wife's involved and I haven't been yet, but it's just still going on. So that to me is what I hear you talking about, Diana, it's the let's get in there and help our neighbors. Um, and I would humbly suggest that maybe the best way to help our neighbors is to find a way to disable Nextdoor. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Nextdoor, but if you want to see in my neighborhoods what Nextdoor does in terms of isolating people and driving fear, crack that app open any day of the week, and you will see the fear. It's palpable, it's ubiquitous, it's ridiculous, but it is so real. And it really does come from isolation. It really does. People just sticking to their own group or just sticking in their house, afraid to walk outside because the FedEx truck drove left to right instead of right to left. And so there must be some kind of conspiracy going on. So maybe we can put that on our to-do list. Come up, maybe it's an anti-next door.
That's our new app.
What that would be. I don't know what that
Actually
would be.
connecting people, not just dividing through like weird conspiracies in your neighborhood.
Tanya and I used
Yeah.
to crack open a bottle of wine and I would do dramatic readings of Nextdoor posts because they're so good. We haven't done that in a while. We should bring that back again.
This was something really cool I experienced when I was on my COVID travels in 2021. I lived for a month in a neighborhood in Portland, Oregon. And again, we were like the total outsiders just kind of coming in, but the neighbors who had been in the area, one of them was walking their dog, came up to me and was like, "Hey, like you're new here. Like, hey, every Friday we meet over here. We set up a little camp chairs outside and bring our own little beverage of choice, and just like it's a way to connect. Like, you guys should come over." And I was like, I was so excited. I don't know these people, but the fact that they were finding these little ways to connect with one another, and then also just whoever else, regardless of like skin color or orientation or what have you. It's like little stuff like that. It doesn't have to be like this big organizing. It's just little stuff like an invitation. Because essentially, in the way of that belonging feels real is that someone actually invites you to something. You're like, oh, you want me? Oh, I belong. So it's like little things like that can connect us. But I know we all have various examples and thoughts around that. But
Well, is there any last, Diana or Des, any last suggestions you have for people related to organizing, relating to protests, related to community? I think we brought forward a lot of good stuff, but I want to give you guys a chance. If there's any final thing you'd like to say.
Yeah, I think we've said it over and over, but just repeating it again, that the authoritarian playbook relies on isolation. And the antidote isn't a perfect protest, but community is the counter strategy. It's knowing your neighbors, it's showing up. It's the revolutionary, boring, deeply human act of not retreating. Um, and I think that connection and building community is the revolutionary act. And that's what we need now more than ever, is to connect with each other, to care for each other, to join the mutual aid groups, to join those neighborhood groups, to connect with community. Because again, at the end of the day, organizing is about shifting power. And the protest, those direct actions are one part of a bigger picture, but it brings people together. It helps create connection, and it helps build momentum and power uh, to hopefully connect with each other and change. what we're seeing right now. We need to shift that power, but we need to connect with each other first to be able to do that. Yeah.
Oh,
And truly, I would just say the world is just too hard right now to be hard on each other. So that's how I'm feeling. I
love
think I
that.
told Des earlier, I'm in my soft era. The world's too hard to be hard on each other right now. We got to give each other a little grace.
No, I love that. I have a suggestion, and you guys can ponder it. We should have an Andor watch party situation. Tanya's never seen Andor. Has your partner, Des, seen Andor? Screen seen Andor?
No. Maybe she has
Diana,
actually.
you
I've
said
never asked.
Okay.
so we could have a little watch party where we all watch at the same time. We text like back in the day on the Oscars when you would do that. Just saying,
I'm in.
something we could do.
I'm 100%
Look
in.
at Des.
And
Des is
really
hesitating, Diana. Look at her.
see this. The text thread would just be like, what do you think, Des? What now? What do you think about that? That was awesome, right?
Just like live
Right.
WhatsApping.
Des would be like, there's no
I'm
way that
in.
laser gun would shoot that way. I don't like this kind of
I'm
fiction.
a realist.
You are too real.
Too
Too
real.
real.
I keep it
Well,
too
you
real.
got to open up.
No.
All
All right.
right.
Well, we'll
I'm
figure that
in.
out.
Just give me the invite. Invite me to the WhatsApp channel. I'm in to watch Andor all together and to make Des like sci-fi.
All right. I love that. Diana, thank you so much for joining us. I think it's pretty certain we will have you back at some point. That was phenomenal.
Thank you so much. It was so great to spend time with you all tonight.
Yeah.
I look forward to the next one.
Okay. Fantastic. Des, as always, thank you, thank you, thank you.
You're welcome. I thought you were just
You're
going to do your
just a
spiel.
your Andor shame is on level 10. It's okay. We'll get you there. We don't mean to pick on you. You're missing amazing art, so we'll get you there.
Get there.
And everybody else, whether you like Andor or not, whether you've seen it or not, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. Hopefully, this has helped you cope in some way with this amazingly crazy world around us. Please like and subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. That helps ensure more people get to see the show. Visit www.bearing287.com or follow me on Substack to access other helpful content from our network. As always, I'm Chris Pevolo, and on behalf of I'm Not Even Supposed to Be Here and Bearing 287, thank you for listening. Talk to you next time.